Did you know that some of the greatest love stories we celebrate from the medieval era, from the 11th to the 15th centuries, were actually pretty messed up? What if the epic romances you thought you knew were really tales of power, betrayal, and sometimes outright violence? Get ready to rethink everything. Number 5. Queen Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer. The story of Queen Isabella, often called the She-Wolf of France, and her scandalous relationship with Roger Mortimer is usually portrayed as a fiery passion that sparked a rebellion and brought down a king. It sounds like the ultimate tale of a woman scorned, finding solace and power in the arms of a new lover. But the historical record paints a much darker, colder picture, one steeped in political ambition, calculated revenge, and desperate survival rather than genuine romantic love. Born around the year 1295, Isabella was the daughter of the powerful French king Philip IV, a monarch known for his ruthlessness and his immense personal wealth. She was married to Edward II of England in 1308, when she was just 12 years old. Marriages among royalty in the medieval period were rarely about affection. They were instruments of state, forged alliances, and secured bloodlines. Isabella's union with Edward was meant to cement peace between England and France, two long-standing rivals. From the outset, Isabella's marriage to Edward II was troubled. Edward, by many accounts, showed little interest in his young wife. Chroniclers of the time, such as Thomas Walsingham in his Historia Anglicana, circa 1390, often mention Edward's preference for male favorites, most notably Piers Gaveston, and later Hugh Despenser the Younger. These favorites were granted immense power and wealth, often at the expense of the established nobility, and, crucially, the Queen herself. Isabella found herself increasingly sidelined her dower lands, the income-generating properties allotted to a queen, often confiscated or controlled by Despenser. This was not merely an insult, it was a significant undermining of her financial independence and her position within the court. The situation became unbearable for Isabella. She had given birth to 4 children, including a son who would one day become Edward III, ensuring the continuation of the English royal line. Despite fulfilling her marital duties, her influence dwindled. The Despensers, father and son, essentially controlled Edward II, alienating almost every major figure in England. By the mid-1320s, England was simmering with discontent. The French, under Isabella's brother Charles IV, began pressuring Edward II over the Duchy of Aquitaine, a remaining English territory in France. This provided Isabella with a strategic opportunity. In 1325, she was dispatched to France to negotiate a peace treaty. This was a critical turning point. It was during her time in Paris that Isabella encountered Roger Mortimer. Roger Mortimer, Lord of Widmore, was a powerful marcher lord, a nobleman whose lands bordered Wales and who held significant military power. He had been a prominent opponent of Edward II and the Despensers, leading a rebellion in 1321 to 1322. His rebellion had failed, and he had been imprisoned in the Tower of London, but he made a daring escape in 1323, fleeing to France. There, he became a focal point for English exiles who wished to see Edward II overthrown. Mortimer was Midic, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. His relationship with Isabella began in France, and it quickly became more than just a political alliance. The Brut Chronicle, a collection of English historical narratives, notes their growing intimacy. But was it love? Or was it a calculated partnership driven by mutual need and ambition? For Isabella Mortimer offered a pathway to reclaim her power and possibly secure a better future for her son. He was a capable military leader with a network of contacts among the disaffected English nobility. For Mortimer, aligning with the Queen gave legitimacy to his cause. It elevated him from a mere exiled rebel to the de facto leader of a Queen-backed invasion force. Their goal was clear: remove the Despensers and, if necessary, remove Edward II himself. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer, accompanied by a small but determined force and Isabella's young son, landed in England at Harwich. They quickly gathered support. The country was so weary of Edward II's misrule and the Despensers' tyranny that many nobles, including Edward's own half-brothers, flocked to Isabella's banner. Edward II and the Despensers fled, but their flight was short-lived. Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured and executed in a brutal public spectacle at Hereford, and his father suffered a similar fate shortly after. True test of Isabella and Mortimer's relationship came after their victory. Edward II was captured and forced to abdicate in January 1327. His son Edward III proclaimed king. However, since Edward III was still a minor, Isabella and Mortimer became the de facto regents, wielding enormous power. Their control over the young king was absolute. Chronicles like the Annals Paulini detail how they dominated the royal council, making decisions for England. Their relationship, no longer a secret, became a public scandal. They lived together openly, sharing a bed and ruling the country. This open affair, while a sign of their power, also generated considerable resentment. It was a breach of medieval moral norms and a direct affront to the dignity of the monarchy. The ultimate act attributed to their combined ambition was the death of Edward II. In September 1327, Edward II died at Berkeley Castle. The official cause of death was recorded as natural causes, but rumors of his murder spread quickly. The most infamous, though likely apocryphal story involves a red-hot poker inserted into his bowels, leaving no external marks. While modern historians debate the exact cause of death, some suggest neglect or illness, others a more direct method ordered by Mortimer and Isabella. What is undeniable is that Edward II's removal from the scene secured their power. A living, captive king, even an abdicated one, always posed a threat. His death removed that threat definitively. Chilling efficiency with which this occurred, regardless of the precise method, speaks to a ruthlessness far removed from romantic affection. For 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England. Mortimer amassed vast wealth and titles, effectively becoming the most powerful man in the kingdom. His ambition grew unchecked, and he began to alienate some of the very nobles who had supported their invasion. He effectively sidelined Isabella's son, the young King Edward III, from genuine power. This created a new kind of tyranny, one where a queen and her paramour held sway rather than the king. The resentment eventually boiled over. Edward III, now a young man, approaching his majority, grew tired of being a puppet king. In October 1330, in a daring coup orchestrated by Edward III himself, Mortimer was seized at Nottingham Castle. Isabella was present, reportedly pleading, good son, spare gentle Mortimer," as her lover was dragged away. Mortimer was charged with treason and quickly condemned without trial by Parliament. He was executed at Tyburn on November 29, 1330. Hanged, drawn, and quartered, the same brutal fate he had orchestrated for the Despensers years earlier. Isabella herself was spared due to her royal status and her son's respect for her, but she was effectively placed under house arrest for the rest of her life. Living out her days in various royal residences, she never again held political power. Her story, while often romanticized as a queen's passionate rebellion, was a stark reminder of the brutal realities of medieval politics, where personal relationships were often intertwined with power struggles, and ambition could lead to both triumph. It was a story of survival, revenge, and the pursuit of power, rather than a timeless declaration of devoted hearts. Number 4. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. The relationship between Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England is often presented as a grand, tumultuous, and passionate medieval romance, a pairing of two strong-willed individuals who shaped an empire. She, a celebrated beauty and powerful duchess; he, a dynamic and ambitious king. Their union brought together vast territories, creating what became known as the Angevin Empire, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But beneath the veneer of a powerful royal partnership, their marriage was a fierce battleground of wills, ambition, and ultimately imprisonment, reflecting the harsh realities of medieval royal marriages that were more about dynastic power than personal affection. Eleanor of Aquitaine was born around 1122, a woman of immense inheritance. She was the Duchess of Aquitaine and Countess of Poitou in her own right, making her one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in 12th century Europe. In 1137, at the age of 15, she married Louis VII, the King of France. Their marriage, however, proved to be politically and personally problematic. Louis was pious and often indecisive, a stark contrast to Eleanor's vivacious and independent spirit. She accompanied him on the Second Crusade, where her presence and actions were widely criticized by conservative churchmen. After 15 years and only 2 daughters, a critical failure for a royal marriage needing male heirs, their union was annulled in 1152 on grounds of consanguinity, a common legal loophole for dissolving royal marriages that no longer served political purposes. Just 8 weeks after her annulment from the King of France, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was 11 years her junior, a man of ferocious energy, intelligence, and a fiery temper. He was also the most powerful feudal lord in France, aside from the king himself, and a claimant to the English throne. Their marriage was a masterstroke of political ambition for Henry. By marrying Eleanor, he gained control of Aquitaine, vastly increasing his territories and power. It was a strategic alliance, solidifying his claim to the English throne. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry became King Henry II of England, and Eleanor became his queen. Initially, their partnership was undoubtedly powerful. They were both intelligent and modic. Eleanor, with her experience as Queen of France, brought invaluable political insight. They embarked on campaigns together, traveled extensively across their vast domains, and produced 8 children, 5 of whom were sons, securing the succession. This period of their marriage, particularly the first decade, is often romanticized as a vibrant and productive partnership. However, beneath the surface, cracks began to appear. Henry was notoriously unfaithful, taking numerous mistresses, the most famous being Rosamund Clifford, with whom he had at least 2 children. Eleanor, a woman who valued her independence and dignity, found this deeply insulting. Accounts from William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum Anglicarum, circa 1190, describe Henry's relentless energy and his constant movement, traits that often left Eleanor feeling neglected and overshadowed. True unraveling of their relationship occurred in the 1170s, culminating in the Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174. This was not a lover's spat, it was a devastating family war. Henry II, eager to secure his vast empire, sought to divide his territories among his sons while retaining ultimate control. However, his sons, Henry, the young King Richard, later Richard I the Lionheart, and Geoffrey, were impatient and ambitious, eager to exercise power in their own right. They felt their father was withholding their rightful inheritance. Eleanor, feeling increasingly marginalized and likely resentful of Henry's infidelities and his attempts to control her own ducal lands in Aquitaine, openly supported her sons against their father. Eleanor actively encouraged and supported her sons' rebellion. She provided them with financial backing and, crucially, used her influence within her own Duchy of Aquitaine to rally support against Henry. She was effectively leading a rebellion against her own husband, the King of England. She was eventually captured while attempting to flee to France disguised as a man, a detail recounted in the Gesta Regis Henrici Secundi Benedicti Abbatis, the deeds of King Henry II by Benedict of Peterborough. This act of overt rebellion was not a romantic gesture of defiance. It was a desperate political maneuver with high stakes. Henry II reacted with characteristic fury. For her involvement in the revolt, he imprisoned Eleanor. This was not a symbolic gesture, it was a harsh reality. For the next 16 years, from 1174 until Henry's death in 1189, Eleanor was held under varying degrees of confinement, often in Winchester or Salisbury castles. She was allowed some comfort and occasional visitors, but her movements were severely restricted, and she was cut off from active political life. This imprisonment was not a consequence of a passionate disagreement. It was a direct punishment for treason and a means for Henry to assert his absolute authority over his queen and his empire. It was a clear demonstration that even the most powerful woman in Europe was ultimately subject to the will of her husband and king. The fact that a powerful queen could be locked away for well over a decade by her husband highlights the immense power imbalance inherent in medieval royal marriages, regardless of any initial affection or mutual respect. During Eleanor's long imprisonment, Henry continued his rule, battling his sons who continued to scheme and rebel against him. Their sons, including Richard, continued to fight their father, often with French support. When Henry II died in 1189, his eldest surviving son, Richard I, ascended the throne. Richard, who had always been close to his mother, immediately released Eleanor from her captivity. Despite her advanced age, Eleanor returned to political life with remarkable vigor, acting as a regent for Richard, while he was away on crusade and later held captive in Germany. She displayed immense political acumen and resilience, managing the affairs of the realm and securing Richard's release. The long years of imprisonment solidified the unromantic nature of their marriage. While Eleanor and Henry had been a formidable couple, their bond was ultimately defined by a clash of formidable wills and a relentless pursuit of power. There was no grand reconciliation, no tender reunion. Their story is a stark reminder that in the medieval world, especially among royalty, marriage was a political institution, a tool for dynasty and dominion, far more than a partnership built on love or mutual respect. The imprisonment of a queen by her king was not a romantic tragedy. It was a cold, calculated act of state. Number 3. Abelard and Heloise. The story of Peter Abelard and Heloise d'Argenteuil is widely romanticized as a tragic tale of forbidden intellectual love, a profound spiritual bond that transcended societal boundaries and personal suffering. It's presented as a testament to the power of intellect and devotion in the face of brutal adversity. Yet, the historical reality, largely documented by their own surviving letters, reveals a narrative far less romantic and considerably more troubling. It's a story rooted in a severe power imbalance, a profound lack of consent, mutilation, and lives fundamentally shattered by the consequences of a relationship that was predatory at its core. Peter Abelard, born around 1079, was a brilliant and immensely influential philosopher, theologian, and logician of the 12th century. He was renowned throughout Europe for his sharp intellect, his captivating lectures, and his controversial ideas that challenged established church doctrine. Students flocked from across the continent to hear him speak in Paris. He was, by all accounts, an intellectual superstar of his time, magic, and confident to the point of arrogance. In his autobiographical work, Historia Calamitatum, The Story of My Misfortunes, Abelard himself admits to his conceit and his desire to boast about his conquests. Heloise d'Argenteuil, born around 1100, was a young woman of extraordinary intellect, especially for her era. She was the niece of Canon Faubert, a high-ranking cleric at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. By her own admission, and Abelard's, she was exceptionally well-educated, fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and possessed a keen mind for philosophy and theology. She was famous for her learning, a rare distinction for a woman in 12th century society. Abelard, hearing of Heloise's exceptional intelligence, sought to become her tutor. He convinced Canon Fulbert to allow him to live in Fulbert's home and teach Heloise. This arrangement, described in Abelard's Historia Calamitatum, set the stage for their relationship. Abelard openly admits his intentions were not purely academic. He saw an opportunity to exploit his position. He writes, "I resolved to unite myself with her. Under the pretext of teaching her, I achieved my desire." He further describes how he began to make love with Heloise instead of studying philosophy. The language Abelard uses in his own account is telling. He describes himself as the aggressor, the one who initiates the sexual relationship, taking advantage of his position as her esteemed tutor and her guardian's guest. He was a man in his late 30s, already a renowned scholar. She was a teenager, likely around 17. The power dynamic was overwhelmingly in his favor. She was his student, dependent on her uncle, and placed in a position of vulnerability. Their secret affair continued for some time, hidden within Fulbert's house. However, Heloise became pregnant. This was a catastrophic development in medieval society, particularly for a clergyman's niece. The scandal threatened not only Heloise's reputation but also Abelard's promising ecclesiastical career, as priests and scholars were expected to remain celibate. To protect Heloise and the child, and to mitigate the scandal, they fled Paris. Heloise gave birth to a son whom they named Astrolabe. Following the birth, Abelard proposed a secret marriage. He knew a public marriage would effectively end his career in the church. Heloise remarkably resisted the idea of marriage. In her letters, she argues against it, not necessarily out of a lack of feeling for Abelard, but because she recognized the devastating impact it would have on his intellectual and clerical aspirations. She foresighfully articulated how marriage would compromise his scholarly pursuits, distract him with domestic duties, and ultimately reduce his status as a philosopher. She famously stated that she preferred to be his whore if it meant preserving his career. A shocking sentiment that highlights her deep understanding of medieval social structures and her apparent devotion to his intellectual life, even at the cost of her own reputation. Despite her eloquent arguments, Abelard insisted on the secret marriage. They were married in secret, with only Canon Fulbert and a few witnesses present. This was done to appease Fulbert and salvage some semblance of honor for Heloise. However, Abelard then made a crucial mistake. He publicly denied the marriage, likely to protect his standing in the Parisian academic community. This enraged Fulbert, who felt deeply dishonored and betrayed. He sought revenge. In a horrifying act of retribution, Fulbert hired a group of men to break into Abelard's lodging. The men castrated Abelard. This brutal act of violence, recounted in graphic detail by Abelard himself in Historia Calamitatum, was intended to both punish him and to prevent him from ever holding high office in the church, as emasculated men were barred from such positions. It was a permanent, disfiguring injury, a public humiliation that shattered Abelard's life and his intellectual arrogance. Following this trauma, Abelard, consumed by shame and despair, compelled Heloise to take monastic vows. He entered the monastery of Saint Denis, and she, against her apparent preference for marriage over celibacy, became a nun at the convent of Argenteuil. While Abelard portrays this as a joint decision for salvation, the immediate context of his mutilation and the societal pressure on Heloise strongly suggest she had little genuine choice. She was a young woman already shamed by an illegitimate birth and a secret marriage, with no family to protect her beyond an enraged uncle. Her best option for survival and respectability in the medieval world was to embrace the monastic life. For many years, they lived separate lives in their respective monastic orders. Heloise eventually became the abbess of the Paraclete, a convent founded by Abelard. Their story is best known through their extensive correspondence, The letters of Abelard and Heloise, which were exchanged years after their initial physical relationship had ended and after both had taken vows. These letters are often cited as expressions of enduring love and intellectual connection. However, a closer reading reveals a complex and often painful dynamic. Heloise's letters express lingering pain, resentment, and a deep sense of loss, mixed with her unwavering intellectual respect and affection for Abelard. She writes openly of her suffering, her past desires, and the injustice of their fate. Abelard's responses, in contrast, are often didactic, theological, and surprisingly devoid of emotional reciprocity for her expressions of love and suffering. He often lectures her on spiritual purity, urging her to focus on God and suppress her earthly desires, even though he was the one who initiated their affair. He framed their tragedy as divine punishment for his sins, a narrative that effectively absolved him and placed the burden of spiritual righteousness on Heloise. The letters reveal not a passionate romantic dialogue, but a continuation of their original power imbalance, albeit in a spiritual rather than physical realm. Abelard remained her intellectual and spiritual superior, guiding her monastic life and chastising her lingering worldly attachments. Heloise, despite her genius, remained in a position of seeking his approval and guidance, bearing the greater social burden of their past actions. Their story is a powerful testament to the harsh realities of medieval society, where intellectual brilliance did not protect against human folly, where power dynamics could easily turn exploitative, and where the consequences of illicit relationships, particularly for women, were brutal and life-altering, leaving little room for the idealized notions of romance. Number 2. Lancelot and Guinevere. The story of Lancelot and Guinevere is one of the most enduring and romanticized tales in Arthurian legend. It is portrayed as the ultimate tragic romance, a love so powerful it transcends loyalty, honor, and even the fate of an entire kingdom. Lancelot, the epitome of chivalry, King Arthur's most trusted knight, falls hopelessly in love with Queen Guinevere, Arthur's beautiful wife. Their illicit affair is often depicted as a passionate, irresistible force that leads to the downfall of Camelot, painting it as a bittersweet testament to true love. However, when we look closer at the narrative details, especially in foundational texts like Chrétien de Troyes, Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, circa 1177 to 1181, and Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, 1485, the story reveals itself to be less about an epic romance and more about destructive adultery, of personal occurrences, and the detestopicence of purse day. In the realm of Arthurian legend, Lancelot is introduced as the greatest knight of the Round Table, paragon of virtue, strength, and unwavering loyalty to King Arthur. He is the king's champion, his most trusted friend, and the embodiment of chivalric ideals. Guinevere is Arthur's queen, a woman of great beauty and dignity. Their relationship begins innocently enough, rooted in the courtly love tradition that was popular in medieval aristocratic circles. This tradition often involved a knight's devotion to a married lady, a love that was meant to be pure, inspiring the knight to perform great deeds but theoretically remaining unconsummated. However, Lancelot and Guinevere's relationship tragically crossed this boundary. The affair, as depicted in many versions, begins with Lancelot's overwhelming devotion to Guinevere. He performs incredible feats in her name, rescues her from various predicaments, and dedicates his life to her honor. But this devotion slowly morphs into an intense, illicit passion. Chrétien de Troyes' work, one of the earliest full accounts, shows Lancelot's almost obsessive adoration for Guinevere, where he places her will above all else, even his own dignity. In one famous episode, he rides in a cart, a vehicle reserved for criminals, simply because a dwarf tells him Guinevere wants him to. This act, while showing his complete obedience to her, is considered a great humiliation for a knight, indicating the extent to which his reason is clouded by his feelings. The physical consummation of their love is often portrayed as a powerful, unavoidable destiny, but it is unequivocally an act of adultery. In medieval society, adultery, especially involving the queen, was a grave offense, considered treasonous and deeply dishonorable. It undermined the very foundation of the monarchy and the sacred vows of marriage. The romance is often highlighted by secret meetings and passionate embraces, but these moments are always shadowed by deceit and the ever-present threat of exposure. Their love is hidden, reliant on lies and subterfuge to maintain its existence. This secrecy inherently makes the relationship destructive, as it requires a constant betrayal of trust. Lancelot betrays his king, his best friend, and his sworn vows of loyalty to the Round Table. Guinevere betrays her husband, her queenly duties, and the stability of the kingdom. These betrayals are the true engines of the story, not the romance itself. Consequences of their affair are catastrophic for Camelot. The unraveling begins when two of Arthur's knights, Sir Agravaine and Sir Mordred, Arthur's illegitimate son and nephew, expose the affair to King Arthur. Arthur, initially hesitant to believe the accusations against his queen and his most trusted knight, is eventually forced to act. This exposure shatters the unity of the Round Table, the very symbol of Arthur's just rule. Lancelot is forced to flee, taking with him many loyal knights who choose his side. Guinevere is condemned to be burned at the stake, a traditional medieval punishment for adultery and treason. It is here that the story takes its most violent and unromantic turn. Lancelot, in a desperate attempt to rescue Guinevere from her execution, rides in with his followers. In the ensuing battle, Lancelot inadvertently kills several of Arthur's loyal knights, including Sir Gareth and Sir Gaheris, the brothers of Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew, and one of his most beloved knights. This act of violence is pivotal. Gawain, consumed by grief and a thirst for vengeance for his slain brothers, refuses any reconciliation with Lancelot. His insistence on vengeance escalates the conflict into a full-scale civil war. King Arthur, torn between his love for Guinevere, his loyalty to Lancelot, and his duty to uphold justice, is forced to pursue Lancelot into exile in France. This leaves his kingdom vulnerable. While Arthur is away, Mordred, his ambitious and treacherous nephew, seizes the opportunity to usurp the throne, claiming Arthur is dead. This forces Arthur to return to England, leading to the devastating Battle of Camlan. The Battle of Camlan is the final bloody climax of the Arthurian saga. In this battle, King Arthur is mortally wounded, and almost all the knights of the Round Table are killed. The realm is plunged into chaos, and the glorious dream of Camelot is utterly destroyed. Lancelot, though he eventually returns to try and help Arthur, arrives too late to prevent the catastrophe he inadvertently set in motion. In the aftermath, Guinevere retreats to a convent, choosing a life of penance and repentance. Lancelot, overcome with guilt and sorrow, becomes a hermit, living out his days in solitude and remorse. Their love leads not to a happy ending, not even a noble sacrifice, but to isolation, regret, and the complete annihilation of everything they once held dear. The romantic notion of their irresistible passion fades dramatically when faced with the consequences: betrayal, murder of innocent knights, civil war, the death of a king, and the downfall of an entire civilization. Their story is a cautionary tale, illustrating how destructive personal desires left unchecked and placed above honor and duty can unravel the very fabric of society, leaving behind only ruin and regret, not a celebration of true, enduring love. Number 1. Tristan and Iseult. The legend of Tristan and Iseult stands as one of the most powerful and enduring medieval romances celebrated for its tragic beauty and a seemingly insurmountable passion between its doomed lovers. It is typically presented as a story of a love potion, a magical drink that binds two souls together in an unbreakable fated bond, leading to a heartbreaking narrative of forbidden love, loyalty, and ultimate demise. This enchantment, however, masks a far more complicated and coercive reality, revealing a tale deeply rooted in deception, political obligation, and the destructive power of circumstances, rather than a pure, voluntary, and idyllic romance. The story, in its numerous medieval iterations, such as those by Berulle, Thomas of Britain, and Gottfried von Strasbourg, all roughly 12th–13th century, consistently brows the lack of true agency for its protagonist, especially Iseult, whose destinies, destiny. Tristan, the nephew of King Mark of Cornwall, is a brave and loyal knight. Cornwall is frequently terrorized by the giant Morholt, the brother of the Queen of Ireland, who demands a tribute of young people from Cornwall. Tristan bravely fights and defeats Morholt in a duel, but is wounded by Morholt's poisoned sword. The poison leaves him gravely ill. To be healed, Tristan travels in disguise to Ireland, where only Morholt's sister, Iseult's mother, possesses the skill to cure him. There, the young Irish princess Iseult, skilled in healing arts herself, recognizes the fragment of Tristan's sword in his wound and suspects his true identity as her uncle's killer. Yet she is convinced by her mother to heal him, and he recovers. This initial encounter is marked by suspicion and a deadly secret, not budding romance. The second critical juncture involves a quest for a bride. King Mark, under pressure to marry and secure the succession, decides to take Iseult as his queen. Tristan, as his loyal nephew, is dispatched to Ireland to escort Iseult back to Cornwall. This journey is central to the Romanticized narrative, because it is aboard the ship that the infamous love potion is consumed. Iseult's mother had prepared a special potion intended to be drunk by Iseult and King Mark on their wedding night to ensure they would fall deeply in love and thus secure a strong bond between the kingdoms of Cornwall and Ireland. However, by a cruel twist of fate or misunderstanding, Tristan and Iseult accidentally drink the potion together. This accident is the linchpin of the romantic narrative. It's often portrayed as an unavoidable, mystical force that absolves the lovers of their sin, making their subsequent adultery seem like a tragic destiny. Yet, consider the implications. Neither Tristan nor Iseult chose to fall in love. Their intense, all-consuming passion is the direct result of a magical compulsion. This eliminates true consent and agency. Iseult was already betrothed to King Mark. Her marriage, a political necessity to secure peace between two warring nations. She was being transported as a bride, a pawn in a diplomatic game. Potion, intended for her marriage, traps her in a love for a man who is not her husband, to be fundamentally altering her destiny without her will. This is not the blossoming of two independent souls. It is a magical imposition, a violation of personal freedom. Upon their arrival in Cornwall, Iseult marries King Mark. Despite her love for Tristan, she fulfills her royal duty. The story then devolves into a complex web of deceit and subterfuge as Tristan and Iseult try to maintain their affair while hiding it from King Mark and his suspicious courtiers. They employ clever tricks, disguises, and the help of loyal servants to arrange secret meetings. This period is often romanticized as the passionate, dangerous pursuit of love, but it is fundamentally built on betrayal and disrespect for the marital bond and the king. Tristan, the loyal knight, becomes a constant source of deception in his uncle's court. Iseult the queen lives a double life, constantly at risk of exposure and the brutal consequences of adultery. The story is punctuated by numerous near discoveries and elaborate schemes to evade detection. King Mark, though he loves Iseult, is repeatedly made a fool of, his trust broken by his closest kin. In some versions, he is portrayed as a sympathetic figure, deeply hurt by the betrayal. In others, he is seen as a somewhat naive ruler. The repeated use of deception, including Iseult's famous oath where she swears her innocence by saying no man has been between her legs except her husband and the beggar who carried her ashore, referring to Tristan disguised, shanks the desperation and moral compromise inherent in their relationship. This is not noble, pure love. It is love entangled in a web of lies. Consequences of their love are constant suffering and exile. They are repeatedly discovered, separated, and banished. Tristan is often exiled, wandering in foreign lands, suffering from his lovesickness and longing for Iseult. Iseult remains at court, trapped by her marriage and her forbidden desire. Their passion leads not to happiness, but to a continuous cycle of yearning, separation, and fear. It prevents Tristan from fulfilling his full potential as a knight and leaves Iseult in a state of perpetual torment. The ultimate tragedy of the story is their death. In most versions, Tristan is wounded again, this time by a poisoned spear, and only Iseult can heal him. He sends for her, with the agreement that if she is coming, the ship will fly a white sail, and if not, a black one. His jealous wife, Iseult of the White Hands, a different Iseult, lies to him, telling him the sail is black. Believing Iseult has abandoned him, Tristan dies of despair. When Iseult arrives and finds him dead, she lies down beside him and dies of sorrow. They are typically buried together, and a vine or tree grows from one grave to the other, intertwining their memory. This final image is deeply romantic, symbolizing their unbreakable bond even in death. However, the love that led to this tragic end was not born of choice or a shared journey of discovery. It was an imposed state, a magical affliction. Their story is a stark reminder that in medieval narratives, particularly those influenced by pagan elements like potions, destiny often trumped free will. Tragic fate of Tristan and Iseult, therefore, is not just a testament to undying love, but a grim illustration of how powerful external forces, combined with human weakness and deception, could create lives of turmoil and end in despair, all without the genuine consent or romantic initiation that we typically associate with a love story. Their love, born of a potion, remained a form of enchantment that led them to ruin, rather than a freely chosen bond.